Emma Barrett had always felt a deep connection to her grandmother's old Victorian house. Nestled on the outskirts of a quaint town in New England, the house was a relic of a bygone era, filled with antique furniture and the lingering scent of nostalgia. When her grandmother passed away, Emma inherited the house and decided to move in, seeing it as an opportunity to start fresh after a recent breakup. She planned to restore the house to its former glory, turning it into a cozy sanctuary. On a dreary, rainy afternoon, Emma decided to tackle the attic, a place she had always found intriguing yet slightly intimidating. She climbed the narrow, creaky stairs, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The attic was cluttered with old trunks, dusty books, and forgotten relics of her family's past. As she sorted through the musty boxes, she noticed a large object covered with a heavy moth-eaten cloth in the far corner of the room. Curiosity piqued, Emma approached the object and carefully pulled back the cloth, revealing a breathtakingly detailed dollhouse. It was ornate and grand, standing about 3 feet tall, with intricate woodwork and delicate paint that had aged beautifully. The dollhouse was a perfect replica of her grandmother's home, right down to the smallest details. Each tiny window had lace curtains, and the front porch even had a miniature swing that swayed slightly, as if moved by an invisible breeze. Emma's breath caught in her throat. How had she never seen this before? She remembered spending countless hours in the attic as a child, but had no memory of the dollhouse. She ran her fingers over the tiny, intricate details, marveling at the craftsmanship. The dollhouse seemed almost alive, its tiny rooms meticulously furnished with miniature versions of her grandmother's antique furniture. Feeling a strange connection to the dollhouse, Emma decided to bring it downstairs. She carefully carried it to her study, a room she had recently converted into a cozy workspace filled with books and her grandmother's old writing desk. She placed the dollhouse on a sturdy table near the window, where it could be a charming focal point. Over the next few days, Emma found herself inexplicably drawn to the dollhouse. She spent hours cleaning it, rearranging the tiny furniture, and peering into the miniature rooms. The more she looked, the more details she noticed. The wallpaper patterns matched those in her own home, and even the tiny knickknacks on the shelves were identical to those her grandmother had collected over the years. One evening, as Emma was dusting the dollhouse, she noticed something peculiar. The tiny armchair in the living room was tipped over, just like the one she had accidentally knocked over earlier that day while vacuuming. A chill ran down her spine. How could the dollhouse know about the armchair? She tried to rationalize it, telling herself it was just a coincidence. But deep down, she felt an uneasy sense of foreboding. As the days passed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the dollhouse was more than just an inanimate object. Every time she made a change in her home, she found the exact same change mirrored in the dollhouse. If she moved a vase, the tiny vase in the dollhouse would be in the same new position. If she opened a window, the corresponding window in the dollhouse would be open too. It was as if the dollhouse was alive, reflecting her every move. Disturbed by these strange occurrences, Emma decided to do some research. She rummaged through her grandmother's old letters and diaries, hoping to find some clue about the dollhouse's origins. Late one night, she stumbled upon an old journal tucked away in a hidden compartment of her grandmother's writing desk. The journal contained entries detailing her grandmother's fascination with the occult and her belief that the dollhouse possessed supernatural powers. According to the journal, the dollhouse had been in the family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter. Each owner had experienced strange phenomena, but no one had been able to explain the dollhouse's mysterious connection to their lives. Emma's grandmother had tried to get rid of it several times, but it always found its way back. The journal warned of a dark presence tied to the dollhouse, a malevolent spirit that fed on fear and misery. Emma's hands trembled as she read the final entry, which was written shortly before her grandmother's death. It spoke of a growing sense of dread and a fear that the dollhouse was not just a passive mirror, but an active force, capable of influencing events in the real world. Emma felt a surge of panic. Was she now the target of this dark force? What did the dollhouse want from her? Determined to uncover the truth, Emma decided to keep a close watch on the dollhouse. She set up a camera to record its every detail, hoping to capture any changes on film. As she went to bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The dollhouse seemed to glow softly in the moonlight, its tiny windows like eyes peering into her soul. Emma's anxiety about the dollhouse grew with each passing day. Despite her best efforts to stay rational, the eerie connections between her home and the miniature replica gnawed at her sanity. She became obsessed with the dollhouse, checking it constantly for new changes, and recording hours of footage in hopes of capturing any supernatural occurrences. One morning, Emma decided to test the phenomenon scientifically. She carefully arranged her kitchen, placing a bright red apple in a bowl on the dining table. She then hurried to the dollhouse, her heart pounding with anticipation. As she peered into the tiny kitchen, her breath caught in her throat. There, on the miniature dining table, was a tiny red apple, identical to the one she had just placed in her own kitchen. A shiver ran down her spine. This was no coincidence. The dollhouse was not just reflecting her home. It was somehow connected to it in a way she couldn't comprehend. Emma's fear turned to determination as she resolved to get to the bottom of this mystery. She began documenting every change in her house and comparing it with the dollhouse, keeping a meticulous record of the events. One evening, as she was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. Emma opened it to find a delivery driver standing on her porch, holding a package. The man was tall, with a scruffy beard and piercing blue eyes. He handed her the package with a polite nod. "Delivery for Emma Barrett," he said. Emma was puzzled. She hadn't ordered anything. "Are you sure this is for me?" she asked. The man checked his list and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's all paid for. Have a good evening." With that, he turned and walked back to his truck. Emma took the package inside, feeling a strange sense of unease. She opened it carefully and found a beautiful, antique music box inside. It was exquisitely crafted, with delicate inlays and a wind-up key on the side. As she turned the key, the music box played a hauntingly familiar tune. Emma's heart sank as she recognized the melody. It was the same tune her grandmother used to hum when she was a child. Feeling a chill, Emma decided to check the dollhouse. She rushed to her study and peered into the miniature living room. Her blood ran cold. There, on the tiny coffee table, was a miniature version of the music box, identical in every detail. But there was something else. A tiny figure stood next to the music box. a man eerily similar to the delivery driver who had just visited her. Fear gripped Emma as she realized the dollhouse was not just mirroring her life. It was predicting it. The implications were terrifying. What if the dollhouse could influence events in her life? What if it could bring harm to her? Over the next few days, Emma's paranoia grew. She found herself jumping at every sound, constantly looking over her shoulder. She barely left the house, fearing what might happen if she wasn't there to monitor the dollhouse. Her friends grew concerned, but she couldn't bring herself to tell them about the dollhouse. Who would believe her? One stormy night, as rain lashed against the windows, Emma sat in her study, watching the dollhouse. The atmosphere was tense, the room filled with the eerie glow of her desk lamp. She hadn't slept in days, her eyes red and tired. As midnight approached, she noticed something new in the dollhouse's bedroom. The tiny bed was unmade, and the closet door was slightly ajar. A sense of dread washed over her. She felt an inexplicable urge to check her own bedroom. Slowly she made her way up the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She pushed open the bedroom door and gasped. Her bed was in the same state of disarray as the one in the dollhouse, and the closet door was open. With trembling hands, Emma approached the closet and peeked inside. There, among her clothes, was a small, blood-stained knife. She stumbled back, her mind reeling. How had it gotten there? What did it mean? Desperate for answers, Emma called the police, but when they arrived, they found no evidence of foul play. The knife was gone, and there were no signs of an intruder. They chalked it up to Emma's overactive imagination. But she knew the truth. The dollhouse was manipulating reality, pushing her toward a dark and dangerous path. Emma's fear turned into a deep-seated paranoia. She became a prisoner in her own home, afraid to leave the dollhouse unattended. She barely slept, her mind constantly racing with thoughts of what might happen next. The once cozy Victorian house now felt like a haunted prison, its walls closing in on her. One evening, as she sat in her study, she noticed a new addition to the dollhouse. A tiny figure of a woman lay on the floor of the living room, blood pooling around her. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the figure. It was her. The dollhouse was predicting her death. She felt a wave of panic. Was she destined to die in this house? Could she change her fate? Determined to survive, Emma resolved to stay awake all night, keeping a close watch on the dollhouse. She locked all the doors and windows, arming herself with the kitchen knife she had found earlier. As the clock struck midnight, she felt a surge of fear. The dollhouse seemed to glow with an ominous light, its tiny windows like eyes watching her every move. In the eerie silence, Emma heard footsteps approaching. She clutched the knife tightly, her heart pounding. The footsteps grew louder, closer. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, stepping into the dim light of the study. It was the delivery driver, the man she had seen in the dollhouse. A struggle ensued, and Emma fought with all her strength. She managed to stab the man, but not before he inflicted a fatal wound on her. She collapsed to the floor, her vision fading. As she lay dying, her eyes fixed on the dollhouse. The tiny figure of the man lay beside the tiny figure of herself, both surrounded by miniature pools of blood. The dollhouse had foretold her demise, and she realized too late that she was powerless to change her fate. Emma's life descended into chaos as her fear and paranoia reached new heights. The realization that the dollhouse could predict, and possibly even control, the events in her life consumed her thoughts. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow that flitted across her peripheral vision sent her into a state of heightened alertness. She became a recluse, barely leaving the house, and her once pleasant interactions with neighbors and friends dwindled to nothing. Her journal, initially a methodical record of the dollhouse's changes, turned into a frantic account of her declining mental state. She scribbled notes, drawing connections between the miniature world and her own, trying to decipher the dollhouse's intentions. Her once steady handwriting grew jagged and erratic, mirroring her deteriorating sanity. One particularly stormy night, Emma sat in her study, the sound of rain hammering against the windows, matching the turmoil inside her mind. She watched the dollhouse intently, her eyes bloodshot and weary. The camera she had set up recorded everything, its tiny red light a constant, unblinking witness. The air was thick with tension, and every shadow seemed to crawl with malevolence. As midnight approached, a new scene began to unfold in the dollhouse. Emma noticed a change in the tiny bedroom. The bed was unmade, the miniature pillows strewn about as if there had been a struggle. The closet door was slightly ajar, a detail that sent a shiver down her spine. Her instincts screamed at her to check her own bedroom, but fear rooted her to the spot. Gathering her courage, Emma finally stood and made her way up the creaky stairs, her flashlight casting long, sinister shadows. She pushed open her bedroom door, and her breath caught in her throat. The bed was indeed unmade, exactly as in the dollhouse. The closet door stood ajar, darkness spilling from its depths like ink. With trembling hands, she reached out and opened the closet door wider. Inside, she found a small blood-stained knife lying on the floor. Her heart pounded in her chest as she picked it up, the weight of the blade a chilling reminder of the dollhouse's eerie precision. She stumbled back, her mind reeling with questions. How had the knife gotten there? What was the dollhouse trying to tell her? Desperation clawed at her sanity. She decided to call the police again, but when they arrived, the knife was gone, and there were no signs of an intruder. The officers exchanged worried glances, their skepticism evident. They suggested she seek help, hinting at the possibility that she was experiencing a mental breakdown. But Emma knew the truth. The dollhouse was manipulating her reality, pushing her towards a dark and inevitable conclusion. That evening, as she sat in her study, she noticed a new addition to the dollhouse's living room. A tiny figure of a woman lay on the floor, blood pooling around her. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the figure. It was unmistakably her. The dollhouse was predicting her death. Panic surged through her. She felt like a puppet, her strings pulled by an unseen, malevolent force. She couldn't stay in the house, but leaving felt equally dangerous. She was trapped. In a desperate bid to survive, she resolved to stay awake all night, keeping a close watch on the dollhouse. She locked all the doors and windows, arming herself with the knife she had found earlier. The house was eerily silent, the only sound the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. As the clock struck midnight, Emma felt a surge of fear. The dollhouse seemed to glow with an ominous light, its tiny windows like eyes watching her every move. She clutched the knife tightly, her knuckles white with tension. In the oppressive silence, she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart pounded in her chest as she strained to listen. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Shadows danced on the walls, and a cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the candles she had lit for comfort. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, stepping into the dim light of the study. Emma's blood ran cold. It was the delivery driver, the man she had seen in the dollhouse. His eyes were vacant, his expression menacing. He moved towards her with a slow, deliberate gait, as if savoring her terror. A struggle ensued. Emma fought with all her strength, her fear fueling her desperation. She managed to stab the man, the knife sinking into his flesh with a sickening thud. But he was unnaturally strong, and before she could escape, he inflicted a fatal wound on her. She collapsed to the floor, her vision blurring, her life slipping away. As she lay dying, her eyes fixed on the dollhouse. The tiny figure of the man lay beside the tiny figure of herself, both surrounded by miniature pools of blood. The dollhouse had foretold her demise with chilling accuracy. In her final moments, she realized she had been powerless to change her fate. The malevolent force that controlled the dollhouse had claimed another victim, and her life ebbed away, leaving the house silent once more. In the aftermath of Emma's tragic death, the small town was shaken. News of the bizarre and violent incident spread quickly, with neighbors speculating about the events that led to her untimely demise. The police were baffled, unable to piece together the mysterious circumstances that surrounded her death and the identity of the intruder who had killed her. Detective Mark Sullivan, a seasoned investigator with a knack for solving strange cases, was assigned to the investigation. He arrived at Emma's house, now eerily silent and empty, to conduct a thorough examination. As he stepped inside, he was struck by the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to hang over the house like a dark cloud. The sense of unease was palpable, as if the house itself was alive with malevolent energy. Detective Sullivan began his investigation in the study, where Emma's body had been found. The room was in disarray, with books and papers scattered across the floor. His eyes were drawn to the dollhouse, its tiny windows gleaming in the dim light. He had heard about it from the initial police report, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. The craftsmanship was exquisite, but there was something undeniably unsettling about its presence. As he examined the dollhouse more closely, Sullivan noticed the tiny figures lying on the floor, surrounded by miniature pools of blood. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the figures resembled Emma and the unidentified intruder. It was as if the dollhouse had staged a macabre reenactment of the crime. He felt a strange compulsion to investigate further. Sullivan began to explore the rest of the house, searching for clues that might explain the connection between the dollhouse and the real-life events. In the attic, he found a hidden compartment filled with old letters and diaries. He carefully sifted through the brittle pages, discovering a wealth of information about Emma's grandmother and her obsession with the occult. The journals detailed her belief that the dollhouse was cursed, a conduit for a malevolent spirit that manipulated the lives of its owners. According to the diaries, the dollhouse had been in the family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter. Each owner had experienced strange phenomena, but no one had been able to explain the dollhouse's mysterious connection to their lives. Emma's grandmother had tried to get rid of it several times, but it always found its way back. The final entry, written shortly before her death, spoke of a growing sense of dread and a fear that the dollhouse was not just a passive mirror, but an active force, capable of influencing events in the real world. The detective's mind raced as he pieced together the story. The dollhouse was more than just a haunted object. It was a malevolent force that fed on fear and misery, using its connection to the real world to manipulate and control its owners. Emma's grandmother had understood the danger too late, and now Emma had fallen victim to the same dark fate. Determined to put an end to the curse, Sullivan decided to destroy the dollhouse. He carefully carried it to his car, feeling a strange resistance, as if the dollhouse itself was fighting against him. He drove to a remote location on the outskirts of town, a place where he could burn the dollhouse without attracting attention. The wind howled as he set up a small bonfire, his hands trembling with a mix of fear and determination. As the flames licked at the dollhouse, Sullivan felt a sense of relief wash over him. The ornate structure crackled and splintered, the miniature rooms consumed by fire. He watched as the tiny furniture and intricate details were reduced to ashes, the malevolent energy dissipating into the night air. He hoped that by destroying the dollhouse, he had broken the curse and freed any remaining spirits trapped within its walls. Feeling a sense of accomplishment, Sullivan returned to his car, ready to leave the dark chapter behind. But as he reached for the door handle, he noticed a small, familiar-looking box on the back seat. His blood ran cold as he opened it and found a miniature replica of his own home inside, identical in every detail. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The curse had not been broken. It had merely found a new victim. The detective's horror deepened as he understood that he was now bound to the same fate as Emma and her ancestors. The dollhouse's malevolent force had transferred itself to him, ensuring its dark legacy would continue. Determined to fight back, Sullivan took the miniature replica to his home, determined to find a way to break the curse once and for all. He spent sleepless nights researching ancient texts and occult rituals, seeking a solution. But the more he delved into the dark history of the dollhouse, the more he realized the depth of its power. As days turned into weeks, Sullivan's life began to mirror the same eerie phenomena that had plagued Emma. Changes in his home were reflected in the miniature replica, and he felt an oppressive presence watching him at all times. His mental state deteriorated, and he became increasingly paranoid, unable to trust his own senses. One stormy night, as the wind howled outside, Sullivan noticed a new addition to the miniature replica. A tiny figure of a man lay on the floor, blood pooling around him. He recognized the figure. It was himself. The dollhouse was predicting his death. With a sense of resignation and determination, Sullivan prepared for the inevitable confrontation. He armed himself and locked all the doors and windows, just as Emma had done. As midnight approached, he felt a surge of fear, knowing that the dollhouse had orchestrated this final act. The house was silent, the only sound the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. In the eerie stillness, Sullivan heard footsteps approaching. The shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, just as it had for Emma. A fierce struggle ensued, and Sullivan fought with all his strength. He managed to wound the intruder, but not before receiving a fatal blow. As he lay dying, Sullivan's vision blurred, and his eyes fixed on the miniature replica. The tiny figure of the intruder lay beside the tiny figure of himself, both surrounded by miniature pools of blood. The dollhouse had claimed another victim, its dark legacy continuing unbroken. In his final moments, Sullivan realized the true horror of the dollhouse's power. It was a malevolent force that would continue to ensnare new victims, feeding on their fear and misery, its dark influence spreading like a contagion. The detective's life ebbed away, leaving the house silent once more, a new chapter in the dollhouse's sinister history ready to unfold.